Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you to Parkwoods United Church here in this sanctuary, as well as on Zoom, as we remember and celebrate the life of Kenneth Foley. We will begin by lighting of the Christ candle, realizing that Christ is with us and within us, and Christ's light shines in us all. Death has gathered us here for the end of Ken's life. Let us not just mourn, though mourn we must, for we suffer a great loss. Let us also remember the life that Ken lived. And more than remember, let us affirm and celebrate life as an expression of God's eternal spirit. Each of us lives between two eternities. Each birth causes us to wonder where the spark of life comes from. Every death makes us wonder what of that life survives. What we do know is that every human life with a mind to think and a heart to love is an expression of God who said, "I am that am." Then in every person, if we know how to look, we can see ample evidence of creativity, vitality, and the love of God. Ken brought life and love into our lives and into our common world. Through Ken, we have discovered an aspect of God. This is how we discover God, through and in a life like our own. Though death claims everyone, there are certain qualities of our lives that will never die, but will live on in this tangible realm between the two eternities of birth and death. So even in the midst of our grief, let us affirm and celebrate Ken's life, because our human life is holy, for it comes from God and it returns to God. Our human life is holy in its becoming. Our human life is holy in its arriving, and the human life is holy in its dying. Let us pray. God, creator and giver of life, source of love and joy, we come into your presence to celebrate life, especially the life of Kenneth Foley. God, mysterious and mothering, you are as attentive as a hen with her chicks. We also come into your presence to grieve the loss of Ken. As we gather in the shadow of death, may we see the light and peace of your presence revealed in our Savior, Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen. Thankfully, Ken had done his homework and he picked all the hymns that we will sing today. My job and the family's job very easy, and the first hymn is "In the Bulb There Is a Flower." Voices. There will be 5 people who will share memories today. David Foley and Sarah Clark, who will be on video, and then Paul and Michael and Reverend Dr. Andrew Sterling.
I need to start this tribute to my father by apologizing for this pre-recorded presentation. Unfortunately, I cannot travel and be with you there today. Also, I'd like to thank my younger brother, Paul, his wife, Mary Lou, and their children, Sarah and Mike, for shouldering the responsibility of coordinating this tribute. Now to my dad. As an infant, I needed oxygen to survive. My father walked several miles to pick up the canister of oxygen and return it to our home. Indeed, no single act demonstrates a father's love for his son better than this. Years later, I asked Dad why he walked to pick up the oxygen. He had other options. Dad's reply was instructive. He reminded me that this was post-war Britain, where food was rationed, where money was tight, where public transportation was unreliable, and where the prevailing attitude was, if you had 2 legs and could walk, you walked. Dad never talked too much about the Second World War, other than to marvel at the Lancaster, the bomber on which he was a navigator. Now, the Lancs engines have a very distinctive sound, so much so that when my wife Judy and I heard that sound of the Lanc about to land at Windsor Airport, we raced over there to catch a glimpse of the aircraft. 7,377 Lancs were built for the war effort. Only 2 are flying today. One in Hamilton, Ontario, the other in the UK. With this background, you'll understand why Paul and I and our families chose to buy Dad a ride on that flying Lancaster out of Hamilton for his 80th birthday. The original flight was scheduled for a Saturday, but it was canceled due to bad weather. However, the following day, the Lanc took off from Hamilton, flew over Niagara Falls, onto Toronto, around the CN Tower, and back to Hamilton. During the flight, Dad sat at the tiny desk that had been his post during the war. The pilots honored his service by allowing Dad to stay in the cockpit for longer than they should have. It's no wonder that Dad's 80th birthday flight on his beloved Lanc was all he could talk about for days following the event. And he recalled the memories of that flight many times in later years. My mother and my father both supported me in every way they could, and I remain grateful for their support and encouragement. While my mother taught me soft skills, my father worked on education and work skills. For instance, my father was very focused on my career choice. At least twice a year, and for several years, he encouraged me to, quote, consider banking, using my consistently high marks in arithmetic to support his recommendation. However, in his heart of hearts, he really knew that my passions were advertising, promotion, and radio, and that these are the things I should do. He encouraged me to follow my own path. After Dad left his room at Donway Place, we found a file labeled David Career in his filing cabinet. This file chronicled my long and winding road in photo finishing, in advertising, in publishing, with entrepreneurial business startups and consulting. And of course, you can't be a consultant unless you started something that didn't work. And I certainly fit that definition. One of my ventures was a magazine for the Canadian grocery trade called Food Store Magazine. Dad had many copies of Food Store Magazine in his files, and coincidentally, the inaugural issue included a cover article based loosely on the scripture passage that's included in today's service. However, in the article, the notion that to everything there is a season was more commercial than biblical. Dad was a very strong supporter of the monarchy, and sadly, he missed the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations last weekend. His favorite royal was Sarah Ferguson. The newspapers in London publish a schedule of when the royals will be at specific locations throughout the city. And when my parents were in London, they would always check the papers to find out where Fergie was scheduled to be. Dad once told me it's always a thrill to see a young royal in person. Speaking of young royals, I once asked Dad what he thought of Meghan Markle. He didn't answer my question. Perhaps he didn't hear me, or perhaps he was exercising his lifelong practice of only speaking positively about people. Personally, I'd bet on the latter. I'd like to close my remarks with a story about cars. Now, as you may know, Dad wasn't a car guy. He thought of cars as transportation, and for years he drove Ford sedans that he purchased from Brock Ford in Niagara Falls. One long weekend we needed to switch cars. I borrowed Dad's Ford and he borrowed my car. Saturday morning, my parents drove to a resort near Barrie to attend a retreat being hosted by his employer. Upon their arrival, two of the partners from the firm met them, greeted them, and gave them some basic instructions: where to park, where to pick up the room key, the schedule of events, and so on. My parents rightly expected a pleasant weekend. But Dad was not prepared for the volley of questions he got at the opening cocktail party that evening. Ken, how long have you had that car? Ken, what's it like to drive that car? Ken, that car's a showstopper. Where'd you get it? Dad answered or deflected these and other questions and recounted the entire story to me when I returned on Monday, and we would have switched back cars and keys. As he was telling me the story, he closed by saying, "You know, son, I think a couple of the partners now see me in a new and better light." Good for you, Dad. Good for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. I am sorry that I am not able to be there in person to help honor my grandfather, but I'm grateful to technology that allows me to be with you in this manner instead. When I think of my grandfather and technology, I think of the time that I spent a happy lunch entering in phone numbers into his cell phone for him, only to find by the next visit that he had simply written them down on a piece of paper and taped them to the back instead. My grandfather did not always understand technology, but he did enjoy the benefits of video calls with his family throughout Ontario. I am so grateful for the time that I have spent with him. He had an incredible life, but always had an open heart and an open ear for anyone around him. My adventures with him included some of my fondest memories. All I ever had to do was mention to my grandfather that I wanted to have an experience, and he would try to find a way to make it come true, even if it meant driving all around Toronto to find a little stable in a little park that unfortunately had no ponies to rent to little granddaughters for the afternoon. One time we had lunch when we were visiting London, England, and he took me to a real Italian restaurant where I had real fettuccine alfredo, which was very garlicky, and then we managed to find our way to London Bridge, where I took my most favorite photo which I would not have been on that bridge if it weren't for my grandfather deciding that I needed a special day for the things that I wanted to do while we were in London, and we went to see Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. I will miss him a great deal and the experiences that we had together, like going to Eton Memorial Church and listening to the choir and having Swiss chalet lunches, and ushering here at Parkwoods, where he would take the opportunity to introduce me to as many people as he can. I will miss him, as I know many of you here will miss him as well. I long to hear him call me a clever girl one last time. In his honor, today I will be reading the poem If by Kipling. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowances for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by the waiting, or be lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave life too broken and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word of your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they have gone, and hold on when there is nothing in you except the will that says, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. On time, on budget, enveloped and sustained by his love for his wife and family, and dedicated to the deep Christian ideals and beliefs. This is how my dad lived his life every day. Growing up, we never thought of Dad as a veteran. We didn't even dwell on the fact that his father served in World War I and survived the horrors of Passchendaele. Like many, he didn't talk about what it was like to buckle up and hear 4 engines roar, not knowing if you would return. About 12 years ago, he started to tell me more about how important his RAF service was to him, how the training, experiences, and friendships he made in those 4 years shaped him, set him up for the rest of his life. His active duty took him past the end of the war, so he was able to do many humanitarian flights, dropping food into the Netherlands, returning POWs from Italy, and his tour de force as a navigator, flying from the UK to Australia and back over 40 days in 1946, with little more than celestial navigation and dead reckoning. I'm sure he never fully comprehended how GPS took over that meticulous work. I wish that I had understood earlier in my life the impact the RAF had on him. I'm glad that he experienced enough of Canada during his training that Mom and Dad decided to leave a comfortable home, good job, and their families to come here. His service in the RAF made him a better and more successful accountant. He had a long and varied career that included Derbyshire Stone, Max Factor, Hostess Potato Chips, Gillies Lumber, Lever Brothers, Eaton's, Rio Algum, the Investment Dealers Association of Canada, and Dominion Securities. At his last position at TV Ontario, he even got to meet Pokeroo, and as a guest of the BBC, visit the set of Coronation Street. He was admired by fellow public accountants. He founded and led the Toronto branch of the Institute in Cost of Management Accountants in 1982 and was recognized as a fellow of the Chartered Professional Accountants, a fellow chartered accountant, and a fellow chartered management accountant. He was an accomplished fellow. From 1949 to 1951, he worked for Deloitte, Plender, Griffith and Company in Manchester. He was surprised and delighted when I joined Deloitte some 52 years later, and we were able to attend several Deloitte alumni events together. His ethics and integrity were unwavering. In 1969, Mom and I were in England for most of the summer. Dad flew over to join us for 2 weeks, and before he left, he told the company he was working for to undo some dubious accounting practices. When he returned, they had not done so. So he immediately resigned. Mom and I continued gallivanting about the UK, unaware that the breadwinner of the family was unemployed, and even purchased an antique map of London for Dad. As I recall, it cost £100, an enormous sum at the time. Of course, Dad found another position very quickly. Financial disaster was averted, and the map was framed and is proudly displayed to this day. Dad and Mom were married for 66 years. It was a complete and wonderful partnership and love story. They were perfectly aligned and complemented each other. They shared a tenacity and energy for life that was quite remarkable. Disagreements were very rare, but there was a lively conversation when earned interest became reported for tax purposes, and Dad was able to calculate the amount Mom had squirreled away from the housekeeping money. They shared a frugal, save what you can attitude, so this was not a significant rift. Mom never forgave the government of the day for that decision, though. Their hard work, careful spending, and good health allowed them to enjoy many travel adventures. The pictures of them in England, across Europe, in the Caribbean, in Australia, and New Zealand are wonderful reminders of the life they built together. The first time I saw my dad cry was at the birth of Sarah. He adored Sarah and Mike when they were young, playful children, and as they grew up. Now, he was a formal granddad, often playing with them in a suit and tie, and he was not used to rambunctious behavior. He watched them grow up with pride. His faith and service to the church was extraordinary. As a young lad, he was travel around England by train to hear leading preachers of the day. By 1952, he was qualified as a lay preacher in the Methodist Church and spoke from many pulpits in Derbyshire and the surrounding counties. I know his faith was cemented during his service in the RAF with the knowledge that over 50,000 airmen had perished before him. He was active in the building of both Rexdale United Church and Parkwoods United Church and the development of the King Bay Chaplaincy. I remember him meticulously counting the collection in Arnprior when it consisted mostly of quarters and silver dollars. He loved to participate in church conferences. He served on many boards and committees and provided generous support to charitable organizations, the Fred Victor Mission, Covenant House, Women's College Hospital, and others to put his faith into action. His level of commitment was extraordinary. He took things up for a lifetime. His service to the church, his deep love and long marriage to Mom, his love for his family, his dedication to his profession, and how he found and kept friends for decades with carefully wrought, handwritten letters and an international stamp. He met the challenges of life with an unwavering sense of what was right, great intelligence and tenacity. Dad was not blessed with musical ability or training. His renditions of hymns reflected the Methodist approach that volume and enthusiasm were more potent and blessed than the actual notes. But he did appreciate music, particularly classical pieces. When playing an inspiring symphony on the Clairtone stereo, he would occasionally be moved to stand and play out his interpretation of how the conductor would lead the orchestra. This is one of the ways I'll remember him. Leading, directing, urging to get the best possible performance out of a soloist or a group of like-minded people.
Hello, and thank you all for coming. I am Michael Foley, and I am Ken's grandson. The first couple sentences will be a little choky. It's the Foley way. I've always been proud of my English heritage and for both my grandparents' contributions during World War II. For many years, I've kept a poppy, this exact poppy actually, in the sun visor of my car as a subtle reminder to show remembrance every day, to do my best to act as they would have and treat others with the same respect that I have for them. I was very fortunate to be able to visit often when I was younger and spent unforgettable days at the Metro Zoo, the Royal Ontario Museum, the Art Gallery of Ontario, and Science Centre. I have very many wonderful memories of my grandfather. When my family would visit, we were always welcomed with an enthusiastic, "Hello!" That's my best impression at the moment. From Granddad with his arm straight up in the air every time. We would later dub this, my sister and I, the Foley arm, is also known as the Foley wave, and use this with fantastic results to get each other's attention in crowded and unfamiliar places. Once we got inside, the ritual was to pick me up and show me each painting and portrait in the house. Double-decker buses on the Strand, maps of England and Northumbria, the Toronto Stock Exchange for some reason, and many pictures of myself and the rest of the family. This ritual continued until I was too heavy to carry anymore. Another fond memory is when we would go to the local park. There was a large red tube slide, and our little game was for my sister and I to climb to the top and listen to him to shout from the bottom, "Is there anybody up there?" The echo would distort our voices, and we would shout back, "Is there anybody down there?" before sliding down. So one last time, is there anybody up there? I'll never forget how excited I was to travel with our grandparents to London, England. Granddad was the most excited I have ever seen him at all, ever. We just got out of the little black cab from Heathrow Airport, and he took off down the street, luggage in tow, having no idea that Grandma had just slipped and fell getting out of the cab. Mom and Dad were helping her up, and we were off chasing after him. He would never have forgotten about Fran for 5 moments, but he was in London with his family, and that's all that he could think about was getting us to the hotel. He was very easy to excite. A humble Christmas gift of a new shirt or some licorice all sorts for his birthday, and he would always so genuinely and emphatically thank you. You would always know he appreciated everything he was getting. Thank you for coming to celebrate the incredible life of my grandfather.
It really is a singular honor to be here. And like so many of you, I feel the emotion of this moment. And for those who are watching and those who are following on the video, as well as those that are here, my heart is very much with you. And I think it is a great honor for me to be able to remember and to celebrate my friend Ken Foley. I do so because I have known Ken for nearly 25 years. And my first encounter was actually at the door of Timothy Memorial Church, where I had arrived as the new minister. It was September 1998. And there was this gentleman called Ken Foley and his wife, Frances, and they came to the door and they greeted me unlike anybody else that was greeting me that day. He just said, "How do, lad?" And I thought, oh my goodness, well, how are you? Who are you? And he says, well, I'm Ken Foley, and this is my wife, Frances, and we would just like to welcome you to Toronto, he said. And I realized then that I was speaking to a fellow Mancunian. And from that moment on, every time he greeted me, it was "How do, lad?" Whether we were in Sunnybrook Hospital, whether we met here at Parkwoods, whether it was Timothy Eaton when he attended with Sarah, it was always the same greeting. He reminded me of home and that the two of us shared that very same ideal and background. And it was important to him. I'll never forget visiting him in Sunnybrook, and the two of us were having one of our normal animated conversations. And he had a preacher's loud voice, as already been mentioned, and of course, so do I. And the two of us could be heard probably many rooms away in the hospital. And one of the nurses finally came in and said to us, you know, clearly you two were enjoying yourselves. And Ken says, well, of course we're enjoying ourselves. We're from Manchester, he said. I'm not sure it impressed the nurse very much, but we thought it was very funny. Ken was a man, though, of great depth and great compassion and great intelligence. The great C.S. Lewis had a wonderful book called The Four Loves. And when I think of Ken, I think fondly of the four great loves that I think were a part of his life that he shared with me. The first, as I've alluded to, is his love for Manchester. And the great motto of Manchester is concilio et labore, to have counsel and to work hard and to labor. And when I think of Ken, I think he's the embodiment of those very things, to give wise counsel, to think hard about things, but also to work hard and to dedicate himself to things. Manchester is known as the city of what is called the worker bees. And the worker bees is built out of the Industrial Revolution and the conviction that you worked hard, you were wise in how you conducted yourself, and above all else, you do things with integrity. Ken was very much that kind of man. He was someone who was dedicated, who worked hard, and who was faithful. He was faithful, as you've already heard, to his work within the RAF. And as you rightly said, he was loath sometimes to talk about it because of what he had seen and heard and the people that he knew he had left behind. He felt he was blessed to have the life that he had, and he took every moment of it to celebrate it. He was someone, though, who still in his heart had this great love for his home city. And while he might have served his country, he was very much a Mancunian at heart. And Manchester for him was the center of a lot of the culture from which he arose, a lot of the great sports teams from which he arose, although one bone of contention between Ken and myself was he was a Manchester City supporter, I was a Manchester United supporter, so we decided not to talk about that ever again. He was also somebody, though, who was proud of the little part of Manchester he came from, Chorlton cum Hardy. And I kept telling him, you know, don't tell people you're from Chorlton cum Hardy. Nobody knows where it is and nobody cares where it is. You're from Manchester, man. Tell people you're from Manchester. And that he did proudly. He was also, though, as been alluded to, a man of great faith and of great convictions and loved worship. Not only in his Methodist roots, which were very strong, in his great love for preaching, which was one of the things that I think he enjoyed most of all, and that was to encourage preachers. And I can talk from the other side. I can talk as a preacher and say, Ken Foley's the sort of person who cheered you on, who encouraged you, who said good things, and was inquisitive always about what I was going to preach. He was somebody who loved to be able to go places where there were preachers. He loved public worship. He came to Timothy Eaton Memorial, but his heart really in many ways in latter years is in this very place. And I remember him inviting me to be a guest preacher here at an anniversary service. He did that in consultation with, of course, all the ministerial team and everybody else. But I've never forgotten when he introduced me here on that day, how passionate he was about this place and this church and its mission, and how he was concerned for that as an ongoing thing. Even when he was in hospital, he would inquire, have you heard anything, lad, about Parkwoods? Do you know what's going on in the United Church? Sit down and tell me. But he also had this deep sense of faith that he enjoyed sharing with others. And today there are two very good friends of ours, mutual, the Masons, who are not able to be with us because of accounting issues and because of an accounting conference. But when I think of Alistair and Susan and how many times Alistair would visit him in Sunnybrook and also in Don Mills, I can't help but think that they talked many times about their faith and their convictions and what they believed in. Ken was someone whose faith inspired others and particularly cared for those who are the most disadvantaged in our society. A real Manchester Methodist. He was also, though, someone who loved and was concerned for the world. He was a voracious reader. And he would tell me of the books that he had read, the biographies he read, some of which I saw on the table, his love of politics, his love of world affairs. I could never grab him away from the Globe and Mail. It was always, I think, attached to him vicariously like Velcro wherever he went. He was always quoting articles. Have you read, lad, the piece in the Globe and Mail? And I said, no, I don't get the Globe and Mail. And so he looked at me with disdain. He was fascinated by the world. He loved and was passionate about what was going on. He was interested, he was involved, he was engaged. And I think that that was, for me, an infectious part of who Ken was. He might have started out in an industrial city, but when he came to Canada, he embraced this country and all that was part of it, and was anxious to know every scintilla of what was going on in this world. Lastly, though, he was somebody who, in my opinion, loved people. He loved to engage with people. His first love, and this should be no surprise, was for his family. He was proud. He might not have told them that, or he might have done, but he certainly told me and gave an account of what was happening, either for David or Paul or the grandchildren. He had a great love and pride. He had a great love and pride for people who were involved in his own profession. He would get animated and excited about accounting matters, which boggles my mind, to be honest with you. I too am married to a chartered accountant, so I am surrounded by it on a daily basis. But my goodness, could he get excited about things that were going on in accounting? But he was more excited about the people with whom he was engaged in accounting. He was somebody who had a sense, though, of loyalty to his friends, compassion and concern. He was someone who was smart, but never lorded it over you. He was somebody who was humble in spirit, but strong in character. He was someone who was kind. And I hope that those very virtues are the things that should embody anyone from Manchester. Requiescat in pace. Rest in peace, my fellow Mancunian. Thank you.
Let us now join together and sing Our God, Our Help in Ages Past.
Please hear these words from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 to 8. For everything there is a season, a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Amen.
Psalm 23. This is the King James Version. We've heard from David. We've heard that royalty, how important royalty was to him. This is the King James Version. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Thank you, John Horton, for reading the 23rd Psalm, and Jock Lumsden for reading the Ecclesiastes. Since the ancient times in Greece, they had three words for love: eros, philia, and agape. Furthermore, they have two words for time: chronos and kairos. From the word chronos, we have the word chronology, which is a very strict scientific time in which we use to catch our airplanes and watch the evening news. Second word for time is kairos, which is God's time. From this, we have a saying: time is ripe. Things happen in life when the situation is just right. The author of the book of Ecclesiastes understood the concept of time as if it were ordained by the wisdom of life. For everything, there is a time and purpose. For every matter under heaven, says the teacher in Ecclesiastes, there's a time to be born and a time to die. Ken was born on September 18th, 1923, the year archaeologists found King Tut's tomb, the year they figured out how to refuel airplanes in midair, the year they installed the sign in Los Angeles, the Hollywood. Ken was born at a time of roaring 20s with a huge economic growth worldwide after the war, after the pandemic, with a rapid growth of automobiles and electricity use. Yet the good times did not last very long, as the decade closed with the stock market crash, which ushered in the Great Depression, the Dust Bowls, and the Second World War. So in Ken's youth, he lived through a very difficult period of time in human history. Though the events of the world are beyond our control, we do have some agency. We have choices on how we live out our lives and what kind of person we choose to become, and what and how we will spend our time, our money, and our energy. And Ken lived with a sense of wisdom, a sense of faith and authenticity throughout his life. First, he joined the Royal Air Force in England and got his training as a navigator. He became an accountant, and he met a wonderful nurse who later became his wife, and they enjoyed a wonderful marriage for 66 years, and they had 2 sons, Paul and David. And in his journey of life, God had called him into ministry, and he obtained his theological studies and got qualified as lay minister with the Methodist Church in England. My previous minister here, Reverend Dr. Randy Naylor, had originally known about Ken because of Ken's involvement with lay ministry, and Randy had a huge respect for him. And Ken came to Canada in February of 1957, and he came to Canada because his training was done here in Canada. And he came even though it was very, very cold, and as a result, Ken became an asset to Parkwest United Church, to his accounting firms, and all the organizations he served, to the United Church of Canada, and far beyond what we can name or imagine. And despite so many highlights of his life, what was at the pinnacle was simple joys of human living, the love of his family. And as we have heard, he was so happy and he rejoiced so much when his first grandchild, Sarah, was born. And I was told that it was the first time that he had cried in public. So it meant that much to him. And as we reflect on Ken's life, we can see that at different times, there were moments of divine spark, of joy of life, as well as the wisdom of God. We see evidence of God in the moments of genuine love and self-giving sacrifice and service. In times of pain and despair, we honor the indomitable Spirit of God who was work in us and in Ken, giving us hope. We see glimpses of God in human life, including our own and including Ken. So we rejoice and celebrate even as we mourn and grieve our loss. Today we do both because we shall miss the one who has meant a lot to us. We shall miss the gentle soul who is no longer with us because he is gone. Ultimately, let us give thanks unto God who is with us even in the valley of the shadow of death. God is with us in our joy and our sorrow. And God, who is the creator of the universe, is also with us, who is the source of all our joys and love that we share with one another. We give thanks unto God who gives us strength to deal with the loss of loved ones, who helps us to build new relationships, and who helps us to find new joys in life. In the end, we are reassured that in life, in death, in life beyond death, we are not alone. God is with us. Thanks. Let's now enjoy the slideshow of Ken's life as prepared Paul. Let us join our hearts in prayer. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for all the blessings of life, for watching over us in death, and for all the ways in which we come to know your love. We thank you for those who share our lives, for families and loved ones, for caregivers and companions, for friends and neighbors. Especially today, we thank you for Ken, father, grandfather, friend, a veteran. We praise you for the gift of his life, for all in him that was generous and kind, for all the love he gave and received, for all that lives on through those who knew him and loved him. We thank you that for him, death is past, pain is ended, and he has entered into the joy of your presence. Comforting and caring God, we pray for the family and friends of Ken and for all who grieve this loss. We remember especially his family and friends. May they know the comfort of your love through the support of others and the peace of your presence. And guide us as we seek to offer support and care, healing and hope to those who feel this loss. Strong and tender God, in Jesus you share the joy and sorrow of this life. And so we pray also today for all those who know suffering and pain. We pray for the many people who died of gun violence recently, the people of Ukraine who are facing tragic war, the people struggling with the pandemic, inflation, and those facing food insecurity. Grant us all a vision of your purpose in our life and work together, that we may bear witness to the hope which is in Jesus Christ, in life, in death, in life beyond death. Amen. Let us now join together and say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I'd like to thank all of you to come and worship God, to celebrate and remember Ken's life. I'd like to thank Ingrid, Ken, and Sharon, who's our AV technicians. Thank you all to the speakers and the scripture readers. I'd like to thank the Humphreys Funeral Home for their services. And family also would like to thank you. And they are kind of sad that during this pandemic, we are not able to have a reception. And but they have offered us a little gift bag to remember this day. So please pick one up before you leave today. Our final hymn is "The Day You Gave Us, God Is Ended," Voices United 437. God alone is holy and just and good. In that confidence, therefore, we commend Ken Foley to God's peace and mercy, to God's forgiveness and love. Blessed be God, the source of light, who has caused the light of Christ to shine upon you. Go forth from this world in the love of God who created you, in the grace of Jesus the Christ who redeemed you, in the power of the Holy Spirit who strengthens you. In communion with all the faithful, may you dwell this day in peace. Please join me in the benediction. Eternal God of love, you have been with us at the world's beginning. You have been with us at our life's shaping. You were with us at the sun's rising. Let us go now in peace.